Fire Chaser Express totally feels like a Disney coaster. Like, if you take Expedition Everest outside of the mountain, you have Fire Chaser Express. This ride is so much fun, and it really blew me away when I got to visit Dollywood in 2023. First of all, the setting for this attraction is just absolutely wonderful. It's on the hillside. I mean, a lot of Dollywood's coasters have great settings because the park has a great setting, go figure. But Fire Chaser in particular, it does kind of feel like a terrain coaster, even though it doesn't necessarily get super close to the terrain. Not like Lightning Rod, where it gets like hugs the mountainous terrain. Fire Chaser just kind of has the layout shaped along the mountainside, so the highest points are on the highest part of the mountain. But I just really love the presentation of this ride. Like, there's some really nice waterfalls, and it's got a nice station, and the station has a super unique setup, which is just totally interesting. The theming was very well done. I would make the argument that it's probably the best themed coaster at Dollywood, and that's including Big Bear Mountain. I also love the train design here. It totally looks like a Disney train, like the way that it's shaped like a mine train. Personally, my favorite row on Fire Chaser was the front row, but the back was also good. On day one of my Dollywood trip, I rode in row one. And then the next day I came back and I rode in the middle, and I thought I overhyped it. And then the last day, I think I only rode in the back. But row one was definitely the best experience for one particular element that we're going to talk about in a moment. But you start off with a really short launch. It's actually surprisingly punchy. And as I discussed earlier, I really like this station setup. It's super unique because you pull into it backwards at the end of the ride, and you launch out of the station forwards at the beginning of the ride. So it's super unique. I can't think of another coaster that has something like this, off the top of my head at least. So this first section is just a brief little helix. You have a great view of Wild Eagle. Then you hit the chain lift. And then in this second portion of the ride, you really start to notice that this ride does have a rattle, which also makes it feel like a Disney coaster, because pretty much every single Disney coaster, except the new ones and one other one in particular, they have gnarly rattles. So Fire Chaser is the same way. It does have a pretty nasty rattle. That must be because they cycle it so much. It's also a Gerstlauer, and Gerstlauer doesn't make the smoothest coasters on the planet. I say that as someone who's ridden Hang Time way too many times. But like, if you ride Expedition Everest, you know that ride has a rattle, and I'm pretty sure that's because Disney just abuses that ride. They cycle it so many times a day, and I feel like that's part of the reason why Fire Chaser is kind of rough. The trains are pretty small, so the capacity isn't the greatest, and it's my understanding Dollywood gets pretty high attendance. Like, even when I was there was a healthy crowd all 3 days of my visit in July. Anyway, the second section ends with another switch track section. You stop by some theming that's actually really cool with the fireworks, and then right before you launch backwards, it like catches on fire, which was a super cool visual. Like the big one that tilts backwards, if you're in the back row, that'll point like directly at your face, which is kind of intimidating. Like if you're in the front row, you don't really have the best view of the theming because it's on your left, so you pass most of it to get to the very end of the track, so it's kind of hard to see. But you can feel the heat when the fire turns on because it's like right there, so that's a really cool effect. And then you get a backwards launch, which again is pretty punchy. This final section has a nice backwards drop, and in the front row you get some nice weightlessness on a backwards drop, which is like really cool, especially for a family coaster. Like, that's something that a lot of thrill coasters don't have, so that's really cool. Then you twist around and hit the brakes. Overall, this layout is really fun. It's kind of hard to point out some standout moments outside of the two launches and the backwards drop. There is a speed hill over the waterfall that goes under the lift hill, which is pretty fun. But outside of that, it's a lot of turning because it is a family coaster. So it's not really easy to break this ride down element by element, but just the complete package of this ride makes it a really solid ride experience. Like, honestly, if you take this attraction and drop it at Disney's California Adventure in the Grizzly Peak section, it would fit in perfectly. Like, honestly, that would be a perfect ride for California Adventure. Maybe outside of the capacity, obviously. They would have to update it so the line wouldn't be 3 hours long. But it's a perfect ride for Dollywood. It's actually my third favorite in the park. I'll take it over the giant B&M wing coaster that's right across the midway from it. Part of that might be because I'm a Disney fan. I'm more of a Disney fan than a lot of roller coaster enthusiasts. I just think it's such a perfect ride. Like, I would equate Fire Chaser Express to Expedition Everest. As I said, you take that ride outside of the mountain, you have Fire Chaser Express. And if you drop the ride in California Adventure, it would fit in perfectly. So it's literally a Disney coaster at Dollywood, which is just so cool. And it really speaks to the quality of Dollywood. They know how to go all out. I wasn't as impressed with Big Bear Mountain. That kind of felt like the Slinky Dog Dash of Dollywood, you know, and obviously Expedition Everest is way better than Slinky Dog Dash. So Fire Chaser is better than Big Bear Mountain, in my opinion, even though Big Bear Mountain is a lot smoother. I'm just so impressed by this ride's aesthetics and originality. And I forgot to mention, but those turns in the layout do have some really solid laterals. Like there's one in particular that's just a flat turn that kind of reminds me of a Wild Mouse. So that's really well done. When I first rode it, I described the backwards drop in the front row as having airtime, but on my second day, I felt like I overhyped myself, which is kind of funny because usually you get hyped up by other people for one ride and then you ride it yourself and you're like, wow, that's nowhere near as good as everyone says. But I did it to myself, which is just kind of funny. But that was a middle row ride. And as I said on my last day, I got to do front and back row. And I still wasn't as impressed as I was on my first day. So maybe I just walked in with really low expectations, which is why I like Fire Chaser more than a lot of people. But I still think it holds up even after my disappointing ride in the middle and my less impressive rides in the front and the back row. It's just such a well-rounded attraction. It's a pretty long ride too, or at least it feels that way. That might be because it's not the fastest thing in the world, but again, that's perfect for a family coaster. So that's all for me. What do you think of Fire Chaser Express? Have you ridden it? Do you want to ride it? Please let me know in the comments below. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.